My name is Ava Reynolds. I'm 25 years old, and for most of my life, my parents treated my Army career like a joke. My father especially. Whenever relatives asked about me, he'd shrug and say, "She's still playing soldier." Meanwhile, my older brother Ethan was the family's golden child. He owned a successful logistics company. He drove expensive trucks, took luxury vacations, and somehow every family conversation ended up being about him. Then, after 7 years in the United States Army, I earned a promotion to captain. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. For the first time, I thought maybe my parents would finally be proud of me too. A week before the ceremony, I called and invited them. My mother answered. After a brief silence, my father took the phone. I told him about the promotion. His response hit me harder than I expected. "A promotion ceremony?" he said. "Nobody cares about that." Then he laughed. "Ava, it's pathetic how excited you get over things like this." Pathetic. That was the word he used. Not small, not unnecessary. Pathetic. The day of the ceremony came. I still saved 2 seats for my parents. They stayed empty. A senior officer pinned my captain bars onto my uniform, while other soldiers celebrated with their families. I smiled for the photographs. I thanked everyone. Then I drove home alone. Not a single member of my family called, not even Ethan. That night, I finally stopped expecting them to change. I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore. What I didn't know was that less than 2 weeks later, federal agents would show up at my parents' house. And suddenly, the daughter whose promotion was pathetic would become the most important person in the family. 2 weeks after my promotion ceremony, I was sitting at my desk finishing paperwork when my phone started vibrating. It was my mother. That alone was unusual. Since the ceremony, I hadn't heard a word from either of my parents. I answered anyway. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She sounded nervous. "Ava," she said, "can you come home this weekend?" I frowned. Why? There was a pause. Then she said the words that immediately caught my attention. "Federal agents came to the house this morning." I sat up straighter. What? They were asking questions about Ethan. For a second, neither of us spoke. My brother's name and federal agents were not 2 things I expected to hear in the same sentence. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied quickly. "They just said they needed information about his company." His company. That immediately brought back thoughts I'd ignored for years. Ethan's business had grown incredibly fast, faster than seemed normal. His house kept getting bigger, his vacations kept getting more expensive, his lifestyle never seemed to match the job he claimed to have. I'd noticed it. I just never said anything, because it wasn't my business. Or at least, that's what I'd told myself. "When did this happen?" I asked. "This morning." "And what did Ethan say?" Another silence. The answer told me everything. "He says it's just a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. Nobody says misunderstanding when federal agents show up. People say misunderstanding when they're scared. Before hanging up, my mother asked me to come to a family meeting that Saturday. The request itself wasn't strange. What was strange was her tone. For the first time in years, she sounded eager to see me, almost desperate. The phone call ended, but something about it stayed with me, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. That evening, things became even stranger. My father sent me a text message. My father never texted me, especially not first. The message was simple. "Proud of you, kid." I stared at the screen. 3 words. 3 words I had wanted to hear my entire life. And somehow they arrived only after federal agents started asking questions about Ethan. The timing wasn't lost on me. A few minutes later, Ethan called. He spent 10 minutes making small talk, asking about work, asking about my promotion, pretending to be interested. Things he had never cared about before. When the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but I could already feel something coming. something bigger than a simple family meeting. For years, my parents had ignored my career, mocked it, dismissed it. Now suddenly everyone wanted my attention, everyone wanted my time, and deep down, I already knew why. The federal agents hadn't just shown up at my parents' house, they had shown up at the exact moment my family realized they might need something from me. Saturday's meeting wasn't about family, it wasn't about love, and it definitely wasn't about my promotion. It was about Ethan. The only question was how much trouble my brother was actually in, and what my family expected me to do about it. Saturday arrived sooner than I expected. The 2-hour drive to my parents' house gave me plenty of time to think. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I already knew one thing. This meeting wasn't about reconnecting. It was about Ethan. The moment I walked inside, the atmosphere felt strange. My mother greeted me with a hug. My father actually smiled. Even Ethan seemed happy to see me. For years, I had practically been invisible in that house. Now suddenly everyone was treating me like a guest of honor. We sat down for lunch. For nearly 30 minutes, nobody mentioned the federal agents. Instead, they asked about my promotion, my work, my future plans, questions they had never cared enough to ask before. The whole thing felt rehearsed. Finally, my father cleared his throat. The room instantly became quiet. Ethan stared down at the table. My mother folded her hands together, and just like that, the real meeting began. "Ava," my father said carefully, "your brother has a problem." I leaned back in my chair. "What kind of problem?" Ethan spoke before anyone else could. His company was being investigated. Federal investigators believed contracts had been manipulated. Money had allegedly been moved through fake vendors. Several executives were already being questioned. "It sounds worse than it is," Ethan quickly added. "It's mostly paperwork." Paperwork. That word made me almost smile. People only call something paperwork when they're hoping nobody looks too closely. My father leaned forward. "You work with government people." I felt my stomach tighten. Here it comes. "You know how these things work," he continued. "Maybe you can talk to somebody." The room went completely silent. I looked from my father to Ethan, then back again. "Talk to who?" I asked. My father shrugged. "Anyone. Make a few calls. Find out what's happening. Slow things down." There it was. The real reason I had been invited. Not because they loved me, not because they missed me, because they thought my position could protect Ethan. My brother finally looked at me. "Just help me understand what's going on," he said. "That's all." But even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. The request wasn't innocent. Everyone at that table knew it. I sat quietly for several seconds. Years of family history suddenly made perfect sense. The ignored phone calls, the empty seats at my promotion ceremony, the word pathetic. And now this sudden affection. My value hadn't changed in their eyes. Only my usefulness had. My mother reached across the table. "He's your brother, Ava." Family takes care of family. I looked at her hand, then at my father, then at Ethan. For the first time in my life, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop making excuses for people. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately, because saying it out loud would make it real. Finally, my father spoke. "We just need you to help. Use your connections. Do whatever you can." I nodded slowly. Then I stood up. "I need some time to think." Relief instantly appeared on all their faces. They thought that wasn't a refusal. They thought I was considering it. My father smiled for the first time all afternoon. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I didn't correct him. Instead, I picked up my keys and walked toward the door. Because before I gave my family an answer, there was someone else I needed to talk to. And unlike my family, that person cared about rules. By Monday morning, I would know exactly what I had to do, and my family was not going to like the answer. I barely slept that night, not because I was struggling with the decision. The truth was, my decision had already been made. I wasn't going to interfere with an investigation. Not for Ethan, not for anyone. What kept me awake was knowing what my answer would cost. For years, I had been the one who kept the peace, the one who stayed quiet, the one who absorbed the disappointment and moved on. This time would be different. Monday morning before work, I scheduled a meeting with a military legal advisor. I kept everything general. I didn't discuss details of any investigation. I simply explained that a close family member was involved in a federal matter and that relatives were asking me to use my position to help. The answer came immediately. You cannot be involved. Not directly, not indirectly. If anyone asks you to use your position to influence an investigation, you need to document it and report it. Exactly what I already expected to hear. When the meeting ended, I sat alone in my office for several minutes. Then I did what my family never imagined I would do. I followed the rules. I submitted a formal disclosure. I removed myself from anything remotely connected to the situation, and I documented the pressure my family had placed on me. No drama, no revenge, just paperwork. The same kind of paperwork my father spent years mocking. A strange calm settled over me afterward. For the first time, there was nothing left to decide. The line had been drawn. That evening my mother called again. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in weeks. I told your father you'd help, she said. I knew you wouldn't let your brother down. I closed my eyes. She still thought I was going to save Ethan. My father thought the same thing. So did Ethan. None of them realized I had already chosen a different path. A legal one. An honest one. A few days later, another family meeting was scheduled. My father wanted everyone there. According to my mother, he wanted to thank me properly. Thank me. The irony almost made me laugh. For years, he couldn't find a single reason to be proud of me. Now he was preparing to celebrate me for a favor I had no intention of giving. Saturday morning arrived. Before leaving my apartment, I opened a small wooden box that sat on my bookshelf. Inside was a letter from my grandfather, the only person in my family who had ever respected my service. He had given it to me years earlier. I unfolded the paper and read the line I had memorized long ago. Integrity is the one thing nobody can take from you, unless you hand it over yourself. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I picked up a plain manila folder from my desk. Inside were copies of every disclosure and recusal document I had filed, proof that my decision had already been made, proof that no phone call could be made, no favors could be granted, no strings could be pulled. As I drove toward my parents' house, I felt surprisingly calm. Not because the conversation ahead would be easy, because it wouldn't. I knew exactly how my father would react. I knew Ethan would blame me. I knew my mother would cry. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of disappointing them. The people who skipped my promotion ceremony no longer had the power to decide my worth, and in a few hours, they were going to find that out, the hard way. When I arrived at my parents' house, everyone was already there. My father looked happier than I had seen him in years. Ethan seemed relaxed, for the first time since the investigation started. Even my mother looked relieved. The moment I walked through the door, my father smiled. "There's our hero," he said. Hero. A few months earlier, my promotion had been pathetic. Now, I was a hero. Amazing how quickly people change when they need something. We gathered around the dining room table. Coffee was poured. Small talk filled the room. Then my father finally leaned back in his chair. "So," he said confidently, "tell us the good news." Every eye turned toward me. They were waiting for a solution, waiting for me to tell them I had fixed everything. Instead, I placed the manila folder on the table. The room immediately went quiet. My father smiled. He thought the folder contained answers. In a way, it did, just not the answers he wanted. I pushed it toward the center of the table, then I looked directly at Ethan. "I can't help you." The smile disappeared from my father's face. "What do you mean?" I opened the folder. Inside were copies of every document I had filed. I reported the situation. The room froze. I disclosed the conflict. "I formally removed myself from anything connected to your case, and I documented the request that was made during our last meeting." For several seconds, nobody spoke. They simply stared at me, trying to understand what they had just heard. Then my father exploded. "You did what?" His voice echoed through the room. "You reported your own family?" I remained calm. "I followed the law." Ethan shot to his feet. His face had gone pale. "You've ruined everything." "No," I replied quietly. "I protected my career." "And I protected myself." My mother looked like she might cry. "Ava, he's your brother." I nodded. "Yes." "And that doesn't change what was asked of me." My father slammed his hand on the table. "After everything we've done for you?" That sentence almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me? The empty seats at my promotion ceremony? The years of mockery? The word pathetic? Those memories flashed through my mind one after another. Then something happened that surprised even me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hurt. I was simply finished. I looked directly at my father. "Do you remember what you called my promotion?" His expression hardened. Neither of us needed him to answer. I remembered every word. "You called it pathetic." The room became silent again. I held his gaze. "You weren't willing to support me when I earned something honestly. So why would you expect me to risk everything for something dishonest?" Nobody had an answer. Not my father, not Ethan, not anyone. My mother finally whispered, "I was only trying to keep the family together." I looked at her gently. "No, Mom. You were trying to keep everyone comfortable. There's a difference." Tears filled her eyes, but for once I didn't rush to make things easier. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften the truth. I simply stood up. I picked up my coat, and I picked up the folder. My father pointed toward the door. His face was red with anger. "If you walk out of this house, don't bother coming back." For years, those words would have terrified me. Not anymore. I walked to the doorway and stopped. Then I turned around one last time. The entire family was staring at me, waiting, hoping I would surrender. Instead, I gave them the only answer I had left. If being part of this family requires me to sacrifice my integrity, I paused. Then I stopped belonging here a long time ago. And with that, I walked out. This time, nobody followed. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called my name. For the first time in 25 years, I left that house completely free. The strange thing about walking away from your family is that the world doesn't stop. The sun still rises. People still go to work. Life keeps moving. For years, I had convinced myself that losing my family's approval would break me. Instead, it felt like putting down a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. The weeks after that final meeting were surprisingly quiet. My father never called, not once. Ethan didn't call either. The only person who reached out was my mother. At first, she sent short messages, then longer ones. Most of them said the same thing: "We can still fix this." But there was nothing left to fix. The problem wasn't the investigation. The problem had existed long before federal agents ever appeared. The problem was that my family only valued me when they needed something from me. And for the first time in my life, I refused to play that role. Several months later, news about Ethan's company became public. Federal prosecutors announced charges related to fraudulent contracts and financial misconduct. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paperwork. And it definitely wasn't bad luck. The investigation had uncovered far more than anyone expected. I learned everything the same way everyone else did, from the news, exactly as it should have been. I had never touched the case, never made a phone call, never asked a question, never tried to influence anything. My conscience was clean, and because I had handled everything correctly from the beginning, my own career remained untouched. In fact, something unexpected happened. The integrity I had protected ended up opening new doors. A senior officer pulled me aside one afternoon and thanked me for handling a difficult situation professionally. No ceremony, no applause, just quiet respect. And somehow that meant more. A year after my promotion, I attended another military event. This time there were no empty chairs waiting for people who would never show up. Instead, I was surrounded by friends, mentors, and fellow officers who had become family in all the ways that mattered. People who celebrated my success without needing anything in return. People who showed up. That was the difference. One evening after the event, I returned home and opened the small wooden box on my bookshelf. Inside was my grandfather's letter. Beside it sat the captain bars from my promotion ceremony. I picked them up and smiled. Not because of the rank, not because of the title, but because they reminded me of something important. The greatest achievement of that year wasn't becoming a captain. It wasn't earning a promotion. It wasn't even surviving the family conflict. The greatest achievement was finally understanding my worth. For 25 years, I had measured myself through my family's approval. And for 25 years, that approval had always been conditional. Earn more, do more, sacrifice more, prove yourself again. The rules never stopped changing until I stopped playing the game. My father once called my promotion pathetic. At the time, those words hurt more than I can describe. Today, they don't hurt at all because I finally understand something he never did. Rank can be taken away. Jobs can disappear. Money comes and goes, but integrity stays. And when everything else in my life was tested, integrity was the one thing that remained standing. That is why I never regret saying no. Not to my father, not to Ethan, not to anyone. Because the day I refused to save them was the same day I finally saved myself. And that was worth more than their approval ever could have been.